Also to all friends and colleagues joining us online this afternoon. I'm Shada Islam. I'm a senior advisor at BCW, and thanks to Andrew Cecil, I'm really happy to moderate and facilitate this conversation today. So for all of us here in the Brussels bubble, it's a no-brainer. Our elected politicians have a great deal of influence. There's, of course, an impact on legislation, the laws we live under and breathe under, but they also steer public conversations. And so what we're trying to do today with the index is to explore what defines influence at the European Parliament and beyond the European Parliament. And of course, this is all very important because next year we have elections to the European Parliament, and many of us here are very intrigued and curious about how they're going to be held and who will be the winners. So influence, of course, as we'll see today, comes in different shapes and forms, and the BCW Influence Index uses a unique database methodology to measure influence through two largely independent dimensions. There's parliamentary influence, that's the ability to impact legislation and shape our political agenda. But there's also, and this is very important as well, is the public influence, and that's the ability to cultivate visibility with European citizens and reach audiences online. So we're going to explore these two elements of influence with four very important experts on this. So we have the pleasure of having with us today Member of European Parliament, Danuta Hübner. Needs no introduction. Danuta is the right pronunciation.
No, it's the nice pronunciation.
It's not the right pronunciation. Okay, Madam Danuta Hübner, who's, of course, European People's Party, Poland, and, of course, Professor Hübner's long-serving career within the European institutions is well documented, and all of us know her power and influence. Member of European Parliament also, Tiemo Wölken, SND Germany, one of the group's leading voices in public health and environmental policy. Eddy, no introduction needed, we all read him every morning, politics reporter for POLITICO, focusing on the European Parliament, and Andrew Cecil, Chief Executive Officer at BCW Brussels. Thank you very much for all being here. So our results will be published online at 5 p.m. And if you're using social media, the hashtag is BCW Influence Index. And if you're going to post about it, please do so. We're very happy to engage on social media. Now we're going to watch a video which explains the methodology that's been used and the main takeaways from the 2023 results. So let's watch the video.
Europe's elected politicians have influence. From shaping legislation to steering public conversations, their actions and decisions impact our lives in many and profound ways. However, objectively measuring this influence remains a challenge. This is why BCW has developed the EU Influence Index, which allows us to understand in detail who is holding the power, both within and beyond the walls of the European Parliament. Our unique data-driven methodology combines millions of data points into two key dimensions of political influence. The first dimension is parliamentary influence, which refers to the ability to impact legislation in the European Parliament. The second dimension is public influence, which speaks to the ability to cultivate visibility amongst the European public and to steer public conversations. On top of the ranking, our teams have worked tirelessly to go beyond the numbers. BCW's bespoke analysis allows our clients to understand even surprising results and to dig deeper into the stories behind the data, showing pathways for both policy and politics to move ahead. Without further ado, let's have a look at the results of the EU Influence Index 2023.
Let's take a look at this year's main takeaways. The most influential MEPs on parliamentary influence have played key roles in shaping policies in line with the 2023 European Commission priorities, from economic affairs and rule of law to the environment, digital transformation, and industrial policy. On public influence, the MEPs who attract the most visibility tend to be those who hold formal positions within the European Parliament, European political groups, or national political parties. Our data also reveals growing polarization in European politics, with several MEPs embodying populist messages occupying top positions for public influence. When looking at how influence is distributed among European political groups, our data indicates that those closer to the center of the political spectrum, concretely the EPP, SD, and Renew Europe, are punching above their weight in terms of parliamentary influence relative to their share of seats. Conversely, when it comes to public influence, political groups at the ends of the political spectrum, such as ID, ECR, and the left, are outperforming their centrist counterparts. This trend is also discernible when evaluating at the country level. Countries who perform well for parliamentary influence are those with large delegations of MEPs from centrist groups. For public influence, on the other hand, countries that perform well have large delegations of MEPs from political groups from the ends of the political spectrum. Looking at how influence is distributed by gender, our data reveals a clear gender gap in the top ranks of the leaderboard for both influence dimensions. While this is especially visible for top 10 most influential MEPs, the gap decreases when expanding to top 50 and top 100. In fact, female MEPs outperform their male counterparts when it comes to parliamentary influence, considering the respective share of seats, while the opposite is true in public influence, where male MEPs secure higher visibility compared to their female counterparts. Looking at how influence is distributed by age, our data shows that experience continues to be a key factor for cultivating influence. MEPs over the age of 55 are the most present at the top of the influence ranking, which is especially visible for parliamentary influence. At the same time, young MEPs have found a place at the top of the public influence rankings, showing their ability to navigate today's increasingly complex communications landscape. Discover the full results, data analysis, and MEP insights at bcwinfluenceindex.com and BCW Brussels, LinkedIn, and X.
So a lot of intriguing information, and actually a wealth of information about the MEPs and the influence they wield. And I think it's about time to turn to you, all of you on the panel, and ask you, was there anything there that really surprised you, anything that you thought was unusual and that you were perhaps not expecting? So, Madame Hübner, if I could start with you. I think one of the things that's interesting is that MEPs from centrist groups have the strongest impact on policy outcomes, while MEPs from the extremes of the political spectrum secure higher public visibility because they're using digital technology. Any comments on that, or anything else that you think is worth noting?
Okay, well, thank you. First of all, congratulations on your efforts. I think there are many probably institutions who try to do it, but I understand that you have made a real step forward. So it's a leapfrog towards probably different reality, where, if I understand correctly, your data-based approach. So, but I would like to warn you that you will still see a lot of unhappy MEPs when they will look at all those things, and but that's just part of the job risk. You know it very well. Before I try to respond to your question, I would also like to say that, which is important for me when I work for Europe, that Europe, of course, is not just happening. It is men and women made, and I think it's very important. But we also know that to make it visible, to make it understood, to make it also appreciated, you have to communicate. So also this aspect of communication and talking to people, which is something I think we all probably in the European Parliament understand better than in other European institutions. I also think that those of us who can be somehow called or seen as potential or real influencer, they also have to have the vision what the good Europe is for them. And I think this is absolutely fundamental. And for me, it's ever closer Europe. It's deeper, broader, stronger. I believe also in something that is European interest. And that's also part of my approach to my job. I would like to make it clear. I also think that national interests, which as we all know are nothing bad, nothing forbidden in Europe, they can be best protected or best addressed by a united Europe and by the best possible solution at European level. Now, you ask me if I am surprised. I think the results are not so much surprising, but they are a bit annoying, especially when it comes to the public influence list and in general the issue. I think that what you said, that the most public influence is held by those who are in the category of what I would call populist firebrands and not really parliamentarians working for the betterment of Europe. That's my approach. But then, of course, what I understand behind your question is also my understanding of the importance of what it really means, public influence, or parliamentarian is probably easier to identify, but public interest is more difficult. And I think that you can be, and that's my major doubt and major question, can you be, when acting against the treaty political objectives, can you be seen as or considered as an influential leading MEP? This is something to which I have my own response, but I think this is an issue where I would like to raise, because when I read the list, I should probably avoid mentioning names, but I can tell you that just not so far behind me, there is somebody also from the Polish reality whose political party is talking nowadays about the intention of the Constitutional Affairs Committee with the proposal of the treaty change to annihilate a Polish state. This is the party he's representing a party which is having on the banner the Polexit, and that considers also that European Union is a sort of more serious enemy to Poland than Mr. Putin. So I'm just thinking that should this kind of people who explicitly act against the European Union, should they be considered influential in European Union? It sounds like oxymoron, actually. So that's my major doubt, because I think that also European Parliament mission is absolutely clear. We are not to strengthen we are not there to strengthen political forces destroying the European Union. So there is something in trying to identify those influencers, because they are active and they are influencing, but should they be in this category at all? So there are like two visions of philosophies of politics, I would say, and this is my problem, which I have to find solution to. But so that would be my response.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, and thank you for bringing your thoughts up. So you're putting a normative value on influence, and I think that is a very valid point to make, especially as we head for the elections. So we'll come back to that question if needed later on, but let me turn to you, the MEP as well, Tiemo. Anything surprising in what you've heard and seen? Anything that makes you think that, yes, things are different and you have to be wary, next election's coming up, will that change your behavior or not?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And personally, I was surprised to be ranked the most influential MEP under 40. So that was a surprise for me, to be honest. But generally, if you take a look at the data and how this index works, I think it really much makes sense that there are a lot of colleagues from the committees with a very heavy workload for this term. So we have the Budget Committee, the Liebe Committee, the Envy Committee, and I think the ITRE Committee, which are very strongly represented, and Econ, of course, on the good point, on the influence index, and I think that it's a good sign for the methodology that the results somehow really reflect the reality. So if I had to mention one thing which surprised me and which I think is the methodology would need a little tweak is if you take a look at the group leaders. So Manfred Weber, I think, is on position 614. I know his influence from the environmental committee, unfortunately. So there is, I think, a bit of tweaking necessary. So I think the ranks of the political leaders is a bit surprising. Apart from that, I think it reflects the reality quite good.
Okay, thank you. So I will take questions from the floor and online as well. For the online audience, just put it on comments and my colleagues here will read them out to me. So Eddy, this is what you do every day. It's your hunting ground, the European Parliament. And you follow the ups and downs on a daily basis, really, and let us know what you think about these results, this influence index.
Well, I think taking the methodology at face value clearly shows there's two. Well, we all know there's many European parliaments, but this shows there are two. There's the nerdy kind of legislative policy-making European Parliament, and then there's the European Parliament as in its public image and on the internet, and the European Parliament that kind of trickles through international media, and it's the one that people talk about if they mention it at all in national capitals or around Europe. So I don't think there's anything that surprising about that. I think there's something concerning about it, which is that, as the other panelists have said, that populists are dominating the public influence side of the parliament, and I'm not saying that's concerning to me personally necessarily, but I think I'm not even a European citizen, so I don't even get to vote in these elections coming up. But I think for people who are supporters of the European project, that's obviously concerning, because you always have these bêtes noires inside, like Nigel Farage used to be, people inside the project who want to tear it down from the inside. But I think what's more interesting maybe is the response to that, and I think it's the failure really of MEPs who are heavily involved, and laudably so, in the legislative process, who are sitting in night-long trilogues and really kind of have excellent teams of assistants working for them. It's their failure to communicate their work, and it's the fact that they are getting beaten time and time again on communication. And it's not just about communication. Communication is political, so it's a political battle. They're losing that political battle time and time again to people who are coming up with untruths and bleating and simply taking extreme positions, which we all know travel further, whether before social media as well, people paid more attention to extreme views. But I think if you take that then a step further, what's lacking in Brussels, what's lacking in the European Union world, is more of a demos, is more of a somewhere like this where people can talk about and debate. And I think because the European Parliament is so fragmented, because as we see people who come from bigger national delegations count more, because it's a hodgepodge of different places. That detracts from the possibility to have real debates. You don't see often the S&D attacking the EPP, the EPP attacking the S&D, like you would have in a national context. I think there should be. I personally think, and I'm not just saying that because it would make Politico's life easier, but I think there should be more of that, and because then people would pay attention more. You need conflict and disagreements and debates to drive a healthy political environment. So instead of just listening to the people who speak out, who are on the fringes, then people would start listening to people who are debating among themselves when both of their views are not populist but are debating a piece of legislation. There needs to be more conflict, there needs to be more debate. And that would drive, that would, I think, make the results of this survey look different.
So Eddy, you're asking for more passion in these debates and more sort of interaction and refuting and debating, real debating. But as a journalist yourself, who do you go to? I mean, are you seeking out these hardworking MEPs staying up all night and doing all their dutiful due diligence, or are you going for the extreme voices because they have more of an impact on your stories?
That's a good question. I don't think we trumpet populist views. I don't remember seeing a Jourdan Bardella interview in Politico recently. We don't need to give people platforms just because we're being told that they're influential. However, the more influential people are, the more accountability they deserve and they merit. So that's important. It's important to pay attention to people, even if they're on the fringes. You know, they're still elected. They still have, you know, to answer questions. But I think at Politico, we also have a very, you know, we have a more kind of political reporting team, which I'm part of, but we also have people who are very closely following legislation. So we do cover both parts of Brussels. We have, you know, I used to write the agriculture newsletter every morning. You know, I was writing about literally the latest twists and turns on the common agricultural policy negotiations. And we have people doing that in health, in finance, in sustainability, environment, you know, everything. So we, you know, it's not really, it's a good question, but it's not really an either or. We do everything.
Yeah, right. So no binary. So Andrew, your views on what you've just seen and heard, but also how does this help all of us here to navigate, you know, the Brussels bubble and the European Parliament? I mean, what's the usefulness of this index, if you like, for us?
Thank you, Shada. So firstly, my congratulations to Madam Hübner, Mr. Wölken, for appearing very highly on the ranking. A couple of takeaways for me, and actually I'll agree with some of what Eddy has said. I think firstly, as practitioners, what's clear to me coming out of this is if you want to drive policy outcomes, there's still a core group of the centre that does really shape a lot of the policy that comes out of Brussels, and I think that's important. But that's where I'd certainly agree with Eddy. I think what you're seeing is a trend which I would kind of rather in a high-level way described as policy versus politics. A group of MEPs who are very much focused on policy and driving policy outcomes, whereas another group of MEPs who are probably more focused on politics in Europe, and sometimes linking that back to domestic politics and using the European Parliament as a platform for that reason. Again, to what Eddy was saying, and maybe to our two MEPs with us today, we'd love to see maybe you being more active in terms of communicating around the policies and what that means for Europe's citizens, and maybe you'd see a bit more balance there in terms of the rankings. And the final thing I would say is I think there are some interesting takeaways as we move into 2024 into a new election cycle. Clearly what we're seeing is very strong use of digital media, social media, AI, and I think there are going to be a lot of question marks around how that will impact the election cycle next year. And I think one of the obvious takeaways is those MEPs, political parties who master digital, who master AI, are most likely to be in a strong position to come out of an election cycle in a strong position. And for me, that's one of the key questions coming out of the index.
No, absolutely. So I'm going to go to that question actually to all of our panelists here, and starting with you, Madam Hübner, is what Andrew has just said. I mean, you know, we're talking about artificial intelligence is being used already in many of our member states. You know, there's deep fakes that are out there that are influencing elections, etc. So what do you see as the risks and the opportunities of AI in the upcoming election? It's going to be much more forceful, much more potent than it's been in the past. We're all on our phones all the time, and there'll be younger politicians entering the parliament, and younger voters out there as well.
Yeah, but I can live with younger politicians. I think we have in Europe very often the problem that we are unable to make the space for younger politicians, and that's why, for example, this new parliament, unfortunately not a fully fledged, because we, after 6 months, we already went underground because of the COVID. So I must say that I continue now to see faces I don't know in the parliament, and this is extremely. It has impact, I think, on the parliament, but it was also for the older generation of parliamentarians, I think, a good period to get better acquainted with not yet AI, but with the IT and being forced to use for those colleagues who don't do it. For example, there was also a challenge, but I think it was very useful also making them sort of less scared of the AI today as well. But you know, I'm not an expert on AI. I know that we need good regulation. I also know that we need good education that would allow us to safely benefit from AI, and I hope that the European Union will be in the avant-garde globally, also on encouraging also other major jurisdictions at least to follow. We have to make it secure. We always had, before not always, but I think for the last elections, if I remember correctly, we had before the elections some sort of warning in a form of a document, I think, warning us all of the fake news, of those traditional instruments which use IT as well. So now I can imagine that we will also get some experts will prepare something just helping us to use wisely and also to be aware of what can be done. But it is a novelty, it is a risk, and I agree with you probably that if you meant it, that it will somehow benefit also those who are more familiar or who treat it as a sort of instrument to use, which means younger generation. So maybe it will help also to have the new generation of politicians coming to the first line, which I think is important in Europe.
Right, thank you very much. And so to you, Tiemo, in terms of, use of digital, of course you're way ahead and, congratulations again. But as you go towards the election, and this is going to become increasingly important, so what are we, are we prepared for this challenge are your peers, are your partners all aware of all the difficulties, obstacles, but also the opportunities that AI and digital offer politicians?
Yes and no. So when it comes to the traditional social media platforms, I think everyone understood how important they are. And I think that people who are who perform very good in the influence index on the communication side, I think they understand that communicating on social media is something different than doing the actual work, right? So on social media, you need short answers which are easy to understand, and the algorithm, of course, helps that the most controversial answer to a question is very successful. And this is very contradictory to what you have to do in the parliament. So short answers will help you with the 1-minute speeches, but not in crafting legislation. This is where you have to go for the compromise, and where you have to spend the nights, and where Eddy is waiting in front of the room to cover the latest developments. And that's something different. I think that our approach to regulating AI is now on a good way, on a good track. I'm not saying that we will finish before the elections. Let's see. But I think everyone is aware that with using AI technologies, you can do good and you can do bad. So it is very good to use it if you want to have a sparring partner, for example, for a political message. So that's where I would use ChatGPT, for example. And it is very dangerous when it comes to deepfakes, as you mentioned that. At the moment, I think everyone can still, if there is a lot of effort put into it, discover content created by artificial intelligence. But sure, this will change in the coming years. So we need to be up to speed to these questions. So is everyone outside of the bubble aware that there might be political messages which are not not original but created? So I think they aren't. So that's where we have to go, where we have to explain, and this is where we can regulate as lot as we want, as long as education on digital skills is not up to speed. We will lose the battle. So regulation is one part, but also don't forget the education part. And
Right. But Tiemo, if I were to ask you, so when you are sort of trying to engage and send out messages on your files, which are very important files, of course, do you think that social media is the channel you go to, and you're very active on several social media, or do you then go to, well, Eddy is very active on social media too, but would you then go for mainstream reporters,
it really
or would you...
depends.
Depends. What does it
really
depend
depends.
on?
So, take for example a file, colleague Hübner, I am working on the SCPs, which is a highly political file, which is very important for the European economy, for many companies. But I would say that from my constituency, no one really cares about SCPs at the moment because they don't know what it is, and rightly so. So tweeting about the SCP file or posting on X or doing a live stream on Twitch on SCP is, I think, not very helpful because people would say, that's the European Union again doing stuff we don't care. So that's why I would say, no, that's nothing I would go really public with. Of course, I will explain what I do, but it's on my homepage. It's maybe at the end of the process, a tweet or something. And this is different, for example, for the nature restoration law or for the pesticides regulation, where people really can relate. This will change how healthy the environment is, and people are interested in that topic and will engage. And on these files, I would, for example, do a live stream because I know this would be interesting for my audience. But this is also different from MEP to MEP. So it's a very individual answer to that question.
Right, and it would depend, I guess, whether... Yes, please.
Also to this...
yes, but I was just going to say that it would depend, and it's a good question for you too, Madam Hübner, on who you're engaging with. Is it with lobby groups, consultants who need to know the details, or is it with the voters who want to get simpler messages? So very quickly, and then I'll turn to Madam Hübner.
So of course, on the daily work, I need to meet with experts on the files, but I also have to take into account what I think the people who voted for me are expecting from me. Yeah. So meeting the experts, also meeting lobbyists, discussing with other lawmakers is very important. But of course, it's also important to discuss with the people from your constituency. And this is what I do in the Green Weeks. So I refuse from doing all the trips all over the world in the Green Weeks. And I go back to my constituency to meet people to discuss the topics. And so you have to do both.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure about that.
And Hübner.
Well, I think what Tommy just touched was the type of file that you're responsible for, and I'm welcome to the SCP world because I'm doing the opinion from INTA on this, and this is really. I hope you liked it.
Well,
we are still working on the compromises, and we have the two teams to get closer. So that's exactly the test of our capability to do compromises, which I think you don't see it because it is within the shadows meeting. So we are very open institution, transparent, but we have also meetings that you don't see where the major job is being done. You probably also don't see what is, maybe you don't see the numbers of meetings that we are having with so-called lobbyists, which Tommy called experts. I am most of my files this time around this horrible capital market, which I'm just obsession to finally give Europe capital market. And I had dozens of meetings, not with individual experts, but with groups of interest. And that's just, you cannot, if you don't do it, you cannot just do a good legislation because you can see as a legislator, even if you are capable of or have knowledge, you just see the first level of consequences, but you don't see the fourth and fifth level of consequences for others. So you have to do it. And that's not understood, I think, well by all colleagues in the parliament who sometimes see this type of getting the information and expertise as also risky, and that just So but I was I had a long history of also negotiating with the Commission and the Council the transparency register, which is about the lobbying system in the European institutions, and I personally am convinced that we can have only good legislation if we really do.
So all the hard work that you do behind the scenes.
No, but what I wanted to say at the beginning, the first thing is that depending on the file, you can enter into the communication. I fully share it. I cannot communicate on capital market because nobody is interested in it, absolutely nobody. So you cannot on SCP. You gave an example, but you can. But even I used to have the report on the international role of euro. Even this was not really just interesting for the public, and so that's why it's. I don't know how to diversify, how to see this invisible work of the members of European Parliament in those areas which you cannot just communicate through the social media or whatever, AI.
So maybe Eddy can provide some steer on that. But just also for you, Eddy, because let's look at the elections coming up to the European Parliament, and you said in a Politico article that the right wing was set for big gains in 2024, but our index shows that the centre is really quite relevant and is holding quite firmly. So would you change your opinion on that, your forecast on that? But first give Madame Hübner a steer on how she should, or she could work
I have absolutely no clue. It sounds really boring. I wouldn't communicate about that. You're right not to communicate about it. I think I don't know what article I can't remember what article that was. It was probably based on some polling, which is probably outdated. So I don't want to make a forecast for the elections. Not what I do, but it looks like the latest kind of polling that we produced, that our analysis division produced this week, shows that S&D is falling. I mean, both of these MEPs' main groups are falling, but the EPP seems to be doing better than the S&D at the moment. But of course, the centre is always, when you look at influence, the centre is always important because they hold the keys, and they are crucial in terms of finding majorities, especially when you have the kind of continuing erosion of the kind of traditional families that have always kind of, the S&D and the EPP, that have always kind of shared the jobs and governed the parliament with a kind of pro-European alliance. So that's why centrism is influential. Yeah.
Right. Andrew, coming to you now on sort of the big topics that will be top of the agenda in the elections. So obviously one can think, looking at the number of articles that are written about the issue, migration will be tops, I guess. And what do you think will be the others? The Green Deal?
So can I come back? I do also just want to come back on some of the digital trends and,
yes, of course.
And so on, but very happy to come back on the kind of political issues. And I threw out just a couple of kind of data points. Firstly, the good news. We go back to 2019, the first time we went back above 50% in terms of voter turnout. Why was that? Driven by a strong youth vote in the elections. I think if you look at national elections recently across Europe, you've seen high turnouts. So I think there is some cause for optimism that we're going to have a high turnout next year and hopefully real engagement from all age groups, particularly the younger age groups. The other thing I'll throw out is the iPhone. The iPhone was launched in 2007. Do quick calculations. We're 17, or next year we'll be 17 years on. I think we're really now in the realms of what is going to be a digital election. And I would say I'm not going to make a prediction, but a kind of prediction. I think this election next year will be won and lost on the smartphone. And I think if MEPs, political parties, are not on the smartphone and adapted to the smartphone, then you're putting your electoral chances at risk. What does that mean? I think that's about what's the type, and I think, Tiemo, you've talked about it, what's the type of content you're putting out there, and how is that relevant to that generation? And it's all of us now who will be consuming our media through the smartphone. And secondly, what different types of channels are you using? We did a poll a couple of weeks ago, the media poll, looking more at policy influence here. in Brussels, and LinkedIn was one of the key social media for policy influence. But next year is going to be a political year. My advice is, yes, be on LinkedIn, but you probably need to be elsewhere as well to reach your audience. So I think that will be really some of the determining, next year I almost think about it, go back to the US 2008, the Obama effect. Will 2024 be the equivalent for Europe to the Obama election in 2008 in terms of the real impact finally of digital in terms of how we vote in European Parliament?
Let me get a quick reaction from you, Tiemo, on that. The iPhone. The smartphone.
I realized that you're true and that I'm older than I thought I am. So that's frustrating. No, but you're right. Of course, we need to craft the messages in a short form. But I reject that I go to simple answers, because you need to be able to explain difficult content in simple terms. So that's the solution, I think. It's not promising that you can solve a problem easily. So, and this is something where I would wish sometimes a bit more focus from also our colleagues from the media, that they not only go for the short sentence someone posts on X, but also try to say a bit more on the context and how difficult it is. But at the same time, I know that in that second, people are not interested anymore. And this is something which really, and I said it before, and I really mean it, this is something where the algorithms of the social media platforms are crucial. And we tried to address it with the Digital Services Act, with the Digital Markets Act. But still, content platforms do rely on the engagement time we spend with our devices on the platform, because they get more opportunities to sell advertisement to their customers, and we spend time watching these advertisements. And this is crucial. As long as we don't break this cycle, social media platforms will always encourage or will always boost content which creates the highest engagement rate. And that's content which is simple and which is emotional. And I cannot communicate emotionally about SEPs. So that's not working. But you can try it. You can try it on the nature restoration law. But was it for good? I think we had a very difficult plenary vote on the nature restoration law. There were a lot of statements which were dangerously simple, also from the big political groups. And I think we will not win this if also the parties in the middle try to be the ones giving easy answers in simple terms. And this is I don't have an answer how to solve this problem, but for me personally, I'm not going that road to the simple answers and the easy tweets. Yeah.
Okay, that's
Can I just, you called out the media there, so I thought I'd sit up and reply. No, I agree with what you say, that social media simplifies things and encourages people to make extreme statements. There was also a question about AI, and how that's going to affect the next election. But I think, and people can say that 50% turnout rate is a great achievement, but it's not. The real danger for the next European elections is apathy. It's the fact that most people, or at least half of people, probably won't even vote at all. And that is the thing that I think that should be worrying people. So yes, social media statements and that's really important, but the fact is that if people don't even bother voting, then we don't know how they would be voting at all. So I think that's a real challenge for the European Union, is to get people out to vote. Social media is one thing, but I also, as someone who sits in the Parliament and watches committee meetings and watches the plenary, which obviously I consume much more of that than the average kind of EU citizen does, but I still think that the Parliament itself desperately needs to change in the way that in the way that communication is done because of the structures of the Parliament. You mentioned these 1-minute speeches. They seem designed for social media. If you want to fight against the kind of, short attention span of social media, why are we encouraging, why are we allowing, why is the format of the parliament, of the plenary once a month, that MEPs stand up and do a tailor-made social media ready speech and then leave the chamber immediately? I mean, and we've written about this on Politico. You can see it. You sit in the gallery and you watch MEPs come in 2 minutes before their speech. They queue up, do their speech, and leave. So there's no actual debate. And if you want to have context and you want to have deeper kind of discussions among MEPs, then that needs to change. And I know that there are. I mean, we've written about it on Politico. That there are some reforms that the President Roberta Metsola is kind of steering. And this brings me to the other point that I wanted to make, and that's what you said, Danuta, about the fact that the main job is being done where you don't see it. Well, I think that's a major problem for the European Parliament. Yeah. And actually, the Parliament's kind of a bit inside out. You have the stuff which is visible is the 1-minute speeches, which you can see, which are then put on TikTok and X and all these things. So you can see that very visibly. But the actual negotiations, where you can get people interested, especially if they're already interested in the file, but also just because it's political, because it's interesting, maybe not on the Capital Markets Union, but on many other topics, that's where, if there was negotiations when one MEP says to another, you're completely wrong about this, what about this amendment? I just spoke to an expert who told me this. I would watch that. I would report on that. I would look at that. I think I would find that captivating. I would find that engaging. So in some ways, the Parliament's kind of inside out. And I think the Parliament itself needs to reform, and it needs to become a bit more of a battleground, and that will captivate people's interest more.
Yeah, we've been saying that for some years now. So, Ms. Hübner.
I would like to go to something you said before, but on this we are trying, we have reformed, and the 1 minute is not just because of social media, it's because we are 705 guys, and all the political groups, and everybody wants to speak, and finally you just allowed to, if you are lucky, to get your 5 minutes. But if you are not bored by 1 minute speech and then you wait till the end, there is all those blue cards, white cards, whatever, you can react to what other colleagues have said. You can do it. So there was there is a lot of efforts to do it, but and also they put us at the lectern. No, we don't speak anymore from the seat, and so there is, but it's of course very difficult. But I would like to go back to what you said about, because you also mentioned EVP. I'm sorry, I have to also react, and we have also to remember that in the specificity of the European Parliament is that there is this consensual process for decision making, and that's why probably also this equilibrium relies actually on consensus of the centrist political families. And the risk now is that in this context of the polarization and all those things that we all know, EPP can give in to polarization, and EPP can just try to heal this polarization with the politics of catch all the right forces. And if we do it, I think this is going to be an error of monumental, I think, proportions, because this pivot towards the far right and further right, if I can say it this way, might finally lead to the more extreme right parties to take over the center. And that would be extremely risky. I think it would be really a disaster for this ecosystem of cooperation, which actually European Parliament is. So I trust that leadership will not do it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, no, absolutely. So, Andrew, to come back to the point I made about the three main issues that will dominate the elections, and then I'll open the floor to all of you. What do you think they're going to be?
Yeah, so share, and this is very much my personal views, but I think my starting point, we're going into an election year. We move from policy to politics, and I think there's context. So I think, if I look out there, what are the kind of three main areas I think will dominate? I think clearly there's a geopolitical context today, which is very sad, whether it's the war in Ukraine or what's the conflict in Gaza. That's obviously providing a context. The area where I think we probably not paid very much attention, but will, I think, come up on the agenda is what I kind of call back to basics. We've gone through, obviously, a period of very high inflation there. MEPs in the room will know much better than I. Even European Parliament elections are still fought on often national, local issues. And I think the pure kind of economics, what people have in their pockets, how the cost of living will actually come back as a major theme next year and be very important. Love to hear if that's what you're hearing on the doorsteps. So that's kind of in the back to basics. And then I think where I'd look at is where I expected there to be differences across the political parties, because obviously differences allow for debate, allow the media to cover this. And I think there are broadly three main areas. I think clearly, and Shada, you mentioned migration will be an issue that will be there and be prominent. I think the other thing, we're seeing this in some of the national elections we've seen more recently. I use a kind of Anglo-Saxon term, that the culture wars seem to be rising up agendas, and I think I expect that to be part of the agenda. And then finally, the one I would call out is around green policies. And we're already seeing there's now a split, a difference appearing between the right and the left on green, and in particular linking that back to cost of living. So those are broadly some of the issues I expect. I'm sure there'll be many others, and I'm sure others will have views on what will be on the agenda.
Of course, national issues also come up because these are, in the end, also national programs. Can I take some questions from the audience? Yes, and also from the online, if you can say. So yes, please, thanks for passing the microphone. Yeah, I see 3-4 hands. Yeah.
I think, Andrew, you made the point very well in the distinction between the politics and the policy. And
if you could just introduce yourself very
yeah, sorry. Sarah de Bischrichan, coming from Vinyl Plastic CVM. So my question is, I get that bringing the politics into the policy doesn't necessarily make for good policy making. That was what you were touching upon, that it might make the debate actually poorer rather than richer. So it's perhaps easier to communicate on why, the beliefs, what you stand for as a politician. Not so easy to communicate on what you do on the day-to-day basis, what you bring into the policy making. So my question is, how do you as politician link the why you're engaged in politics, why you do what you do, to the what of the day-to-day nitty-gritty of the policy making?
Okay, thanks for that. I'll take a couple of questions and then turn to the panel. Yes, please.
Thank you. Alexander Lungerov, formerly with the European Economic and Social Committee, currently Institute for International Law, University of Leuven. We're talking about influence, and it has already been hinted at, the visibility of the parliament in the different member states. It's already a decades-long issue. Do you see any trends when we're talking geographically between the member states, or in time, like whether developments are cyclical, like election cycles, State of the Union, or non-cyclical, like war in Ukraine or any other events that shake up the European politics? Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. A question here as well. I guess the mic can be sent to you because we do need it for the people watching online.
Thank you very much. Ben Kazupi, Unife from the, I suppose, representative of the rail industry. I was wondering, and this is directed at the MEPs, you mentioned your Green Weeks. What are some of the issues that are being mentioned by your constituencies, and is it reflective of the conversations that potentially that we have here, and just what is the difference?
Okay, anyone from online? Ashley, if you're there. Anyone, any questions coming in from line?
Not from now.
Okay, so let's go to you, Tiemo, for some of the answers.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I start with the last question. So basically the questions I receive are reflecting what we are discussing here. So although everyone is criticizing the European Union, and sometimes we tend to be a bit disappointed that national media are not paying enough attention, it's not reflected in the meetings. And for me, it's very important to visit schools. I do it whenever I can. to discuss with young Europeans. And yes, so what Andrew mentioned, migration is a topic, climate policy still is important. The ban of the internal combustion engine needs to be explained every time. I think it's a good decision, but you need to explain it. And this is once again a topic where you have to go into the details to explain why it makes sense not to use e-fuels, which we don't have, which are absolutely expensive for and will not help the average citizen. So I love to do that, but this is really important. But when I'm in schools, I realize that their concerns are, of course, more concrete than the level of discussion here in the European Parliament, but we are seeing the same problems when it comes to the areas of problems. So no, I think that there is a direct link and relation. The second question regarding well, I hope I got it right. The link to the national politics in the parliament, I think it really depends on the country where you are from. There are countries where there's a strong link between the capital and the groups and national delegations here in the European Parliament, and other member states maybe don't consider it as important.
Can you give an example,
No.
Tiemo? Okay.
But it's my impression.
So you're speaking from experience, your experience.
Sometimes, a bit. But no, I'm not complaining about the situation at the moment, because at the moment my party is the leading force in the German government. So we do have close communications. But of course, it is a problem if national governments do have a very large influence on the position of the MEPs in the parliament, because we are two separate institutions for a reason, right? So if it's only about the national perspective, then we would only need the council. But as MEPs, we of course are from regions we represent, but I think we are thinking a bit more European than national government, which is our task. And I consider myself always a European Niedersachse, which is Lower Saxony. So this is how I try to phrase and to explain what I'm doing. And the why and what, of course, I still consider myself young, so of course when I'm visiting schools they look a bit awkward at me and say, you're still young now. But for me it's still the motivation. When I was doing an internship in the European Parliament and I got infected by the European virus. I was catched by this atmosphere, by all the different languages, by the different attitudes. Even as an intern I realized this is something great we are doing here. And this is why I want to be here in the European Parliament, why I decided to be at the European level. And to bring this into politics is, of course, sometimes very frustrating, but I still try to do it.
Madam Hübner, I'd like you to answer whatever you want to from what the audience has asked, but I have a question for you also on female MEPs. So our index shows that they're very, very outperforming their male counterparts when it comes to parliamentary influence, but not that active on public influence. And do you have, that is what, do you want to comment on that as well?
We like things to be done, probably, and that's why we are we are focusing, I think, on our work very clearly, and I think also that women are less probably linked to the national politics, and that's why they are. Yeah, I think so. That at least when I think of those few that are around me, including myself, which probably also allows them to focus more on European interest. And I think I would see more among the women that I am close with. This interest of looking for European interests, and also because probably they believe that if you have a well-organized, well-orchestrated European interests passing to the legislation, then the national interests are also taken care of, and that's my feeling. But I think women, when we think about the next elections in Poland, we just won the elections, democracy won in Poland because of young people and women. And I hope that this will last till June and next year, and there will be again women and young people who will decide who will be representing Poland. Poland, which is actually now coming back to Europe, which is extremely important for us. So this issue is dominating and will be dominating. But I also think that last time around when we had elections, across Europe you could see the climate and rule of law actually. There were two issues which from the studies that are done pop up as common for everybody. And this year probably migration might be, but also I think everything related to the war and in the context of the war with Ukraine and future enlargements, this might be also, I think, a big issue to be discussed. I would also like personally, because I'm elected always in Warsaw, because that's the district where I'm elected. But my constituency is Poland, so I have all the meetings I have with schools, with universities, with business community, whoever. It's from any place in Poland. So I am. My link, Green Week is different because it's not just going home, but it's just doing.
Right. Can I ask you? Do you engage, like Tiemo has said, with the young people in schools?
Oh, very much so. Yes, throughout the COVID, actually, I had nearly daily through the Zoom meetings with classes. In Polish schools, and today I have many of them in Brussels. They are talking with me on capital market as well. So you might be surprised. They are asking questions which I don't know how much they understood. I am trying to, or they want to detail about my involvement with the transatlantic dialogue, because it's one of my jobs as well in the parliament. So they are interested, surprisingly, because the world belongs to them now. They are interested in issues that my generation or my daughter's generation was not really just involved in those things. So this is a completely different generation, I think. I mean, now it's every 5 years there is a new generation practically. It used to be 20 years. So it's changing, but I think that's why they went to vote, I think, in Poland, because they have traveled so much throughout Europe and the world that they want to live like other people live. They don't want to live in this environment of hatred to Europe, hatred to everybody, to our neighbors. And so that's very important, I think. Now that's why I trust that for the turnout, it will be the young people again who will start shaping Europe.
Thank you for that. Eddy, your point of view, and I also wanted to ask you about, well, I mean, do you, when you're seeking the good quotes or the good sources, do you try and see whether you're getting enough women, enough men, center, left, right, etc.? I mean, how do you go about it?
Well, I do, when I read through a draft of one of my stories, I genuinely do think, okay, have I literally just spoken to men for this one? But I don't seek any kind of false balance between political groups, unless I'm trying to write some kind of dry report about what every single corner of the parliament thinks about one particular topic. I mean, we have other criteria for deciding who we talk to. But
what are those?
It depends on which story. I mean, who's relevant? Who's, if I'm writing about the Polish elections, I'm not going to speak to exclusively Maltese MEPs.
No, but I meant.
But I did ask you about Qatargate this year, and I didn't get a reply. So that's a separate thing.
Now we're talking.
But I'm always happy to talk about Polish politics with you.
But that's a point, Eddy. Do you always get the responses? I mean, when you ask it, that's the thing, right?
No, I don't always get it. You don't always get a reply, and I think that that's fine. People are busy. Not everyone wants to always talk to journalists, but I understand that, and we're annoying, we're pesky. That's kind of our job, is to hover around and be annoying and ask difficult questions. But I do sometimes think that people. And, obviously, accountability journalism is part of what we do, but I also think that there's a little bit too much kind of worry about talking to journalists, about sharing things with journalists, and I think that, media can be, you can ally with journalists, you can build up relationships with journalists, and I think that maybe there should be a bit more of that. But I understand at the same time that our job is to hold you guys to account, so we're not going to be best friends.
Right. Andrew, thoughts on that? Best friends with the media?
I just want to. I want to be half glass full. Come back to the elections and just listening to Danuta, to Tiemo. I'm really kind of positive actually about next year in terms of actually having a higher turnout. I actually think in many respects, because of what's going on in the world, I think people are actually engaged, do want to get involved in elections. And I think at the end of the day, I'm not going to take a partisan view on who's going to win or not. But I think we can all agree in this room that what we'd like to see is a high turnout, engagement, and at least democracy working well there. So that would be certainly something I'd be hoping for. And it's great to hear our MEPs going into schools, because hopefully some of those people will be voting, because I think in some countries now, the voting age is now down to 16. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Very few. No, Europe in general is against 16. There are
Yeah.
few member states.
Sorry, we can't hear
I'm
you.
sorry, I was just trying to say that we have been fighting for this 16 for a while now, and we have very few member states who do it, but in general, it's always rejected as a rule to have the 16. So it's
Yes, in 4 countries, and
yeah.
exactly.
But can I react to the turnout, because I think it's very important that also the COVID, then the energy crisis, the war, they allowed people in Europe, for example, to see also Europe in action. And I think Europe has reached, its existence has reached more people, especially also young people, than it was in the past when Europe was never so visible. And now I think also working together with America and helping Ukraine, so it is really visible. And on migration also, the negative sense maybe that we don't have yet solution, which people are awaiting. But I think Europe is just visibility, with more kind of politicized Europe also. That would, I think, work towards higher turnout. Let's hope.
Let's hope. So anyone else want to come in at this point?
There's an online question.
Oh, great. Yeah, okay.
The question is precisely on the turnout. How do you see transnational lists as a potential way to solve this issue?
Thank you very much for that. Tiemo, anything to say on that?
First, I'm happy that in Germany we lowered the voting age to 16 now as well. So 5 million people voting the first time in the European elections in Germany from 16 to 22. And it's enormous number. So they will really make a difference. And we need to explain young people that they have the power to shape future politics. On the transnational lists, I believe it's a very good idea. So we had this idea in the European Parliament that we introduce a second voice to our voters. So with the first vote, they still vote for the national lists, and we add a second vote for a transnational list composed of 27 candidates from each party, and the lead candidate would also be the candidate for the European Commission, so the Spitzenkandidat, and you would finally be able to vote for the Spitzenkandidat in all 27 member states. And this is, I think, this would add really added European value, would give us the opportunity to identify with the Spitzenkandidat in the European process. And to be honest, 2019 it was a bit awkward that the EPP Spitzenkandidat was only be voted in Bavaria. Not even all Germans were able to vote for Manfred Weber, only the people in Bavaria.
But in the end, Tiemo...
But we don't have it. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Tiemo, you are optimistic.
Just let me finish. So I really like the idea of introducing the second voice, and I'm happy that a lot of MEPs in the parliament were positive to this idea to give this voice to the European voters.
Yeah, and then if the member states don't agree, that's a disappointment.
Yeah, can I just say something? Because, Tiemo, wait a minute. Because you were not in the parliament when we had this first time. So in previous legislation, there was also the electoral law and then the composition of the parliament documents, and Council was just... Germany has not yet finalized even the ratification of that 2016-17 electoral law, and now we have the new electoral law with this proposal that you are saying. But of course, Council is totally against, so there's no chances for this.
That's exactly right. So, Eddy, what do you think? I mean, from the journalistic point of view, these transnational lists, Spitzenkandidaten, their value?
It's great for us. We love writing about it, and we're going to be writing we're going to be writing lots of stories about the Spitzenkandidaten process or non-process or whatever mess it's in at the moment.
Explaining it.
Trying to explain it, but maybe people inventing it should make it a bit more explainable because it's an absolute mess. No, I think that it's a bit of a mess at the moment. The Spitzenkandidaten process, the lead candidate process, was completely ignored last time round. So I think that all these discussions about transnational lists are clearly premature when the system has gone backwards rather than forwards. So there needs to be a discussion about even the informal process wasn't respected. So how can we really expect that the process to be formalized? And I understand that now when there's more media attention, it's probably the best time to be talking about this kind of topic. But at the same time, in a kind of realpolitik way, it's the worst time because no one's ever going to change electoral laws when there's less than a year before an election. So there's a lot of ironies there. I mean, also the thing about transnational lists is, Tiemo, you were saying that you feel like, you're a European member of parliament, and you're not only representing Germany, but you're representing Europe. Well, if you do then have a clear delineation between MEPs who are there to represent Europe, does that not re-entrench the other ones as being more national MEPs? That's what my worry would be about that process. And I think it's quite ironic that Manfred Weber, who has become a figure of he's not become a loved figure due to his policy on sustainability and environment and the nature restoration law. People who defend the Spitzenkandidat process, who are more on the progressive side of the thing, are now throwing their hands up and saying, "Oh, if only he could have been president of the commission." I mean, that's pretty funny to me. Maybe it's not to anyone else, but clearly, look, the Spitzenkandidat process is an absolute mess. And it feels a bit silly that we're going to be covering the election in so much detail and blow by blow, because we don't even know yet if it matters who the Spitzenkandidat will be. And what could happen this time is that this person who runs as Spitzenkandidat is the incumbent president. So even if she actually wins the election, even if the EPP, rather, along the guidelines of how the Spitzenkandidat process should work, even if the EPP is the biggest group, her becoming commission president again wouldn't necessarily confirm the existence of the Spitzenkandidaten process either. So we may end up just where we are right now after these elections, not knowing whether the Spitzenkandidat process is dead or alive. And that doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, right. So, Andrew, any thoughts on that?
No, I think the three other panelists are far more expert on this issue. I think I'm going to pass on this one.
Yeah, I have to say that as somebody who writes on these issues herself, also tries to engage with younger people through the College of Europe and schools, I always find it extremely difficult to explain what Spitzenkandidaten is. For a long time, I'm not a German speaker, I couldn't even pronounce it. So I think the first thing we need to do, really, in a multilingual Europe, is to have different explanations, definitions for it, so that people do actually understand. I mean, a 16-year-old voter for the first time will need a lot of education before understands what we're really talking about. So have you got any ideas of how to do that? Because it's your language.
So, in my experience, it's not very difficult to explain. That there needs
Somebody
to be,
take this down, please.
Yeah, then there needs to be a democratic legitimization for the one running the European government. So, and people understand that, and they understand that the one who is the head of the European Commission should be voted and should not be decided on in backroom deals. So, and this is, I think, easy to understand. And at least this is what I hear from referring to young Europeans, they understand that, and of course, when I then have to start that, in 2019 we had for 2 weeks the possibility that the Parliament would have been successful in building a majority behind Manfred Weber or Franz Timmermans, and then we took too long, and then the European head of states decided they will introduce a candidate. So that's of course difficult, but that's also very interesting, but not for everyone. So, and I can't blame anyone not being interested in these deals, but for the ones who are interested, of course, they want to look into. And so, Spitzenkandidat, I think if you take the route by saying the one who is leading the European Commission needs some democratic legitimization by the European citizens, that's the easy way to explain it.
Okay.
But there's the
Eddy?
Parliament. The Parliament does have have a vote on. The Parliament did vote for Ursula von der Leyen, so she's not totally
Closely, but
undemocratic.
yes.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
that's democracy.
But yeah, of course. And now that she is the president of the Commission, of course, we are working together with her. But I think it was really difficult for a lot of MEPs to accept that there have been two very good candidates running for the largest political groups and who were then somehow betrayed. And but what I'm trying to say is that, of course, as a parliament, you also have our responsibility on the outcome, because there was the moment where we could have been very strongly united, but this wasn't orchestrated very well.
Right. Coming to the end of our discussion, anything else you want to say? So I think this is great, because that's the suspense that we're going to have up to the last minute on what these elections actually mean. So we're hoping for a big turnout, which I think is hopefully going to happen, especially if we have these young 16-year-olds joining for the first time, and I hope they'll bring some energy into the discussion and into the voting patterns as well, because from what I hear, their main concerns are the climate and not so much migration. So it may turn the conversation in the European Parliament slightly different, more priorities. So I'll just come back to the BCW EU Influence Index. I think it's a great starting point to understand where we are now, but also a good springboard to understand how things will change. So I would encourage all of you to go on the website and have another look at it, and then try and find which are the best ways to influence, and whether, you shouldn't all be actually working more on social media, so that the center has a good, strong profile, a powerful profile on social media as well, not letting the space to the extremists on both sides.
Yeah, but we also have to invest in having educated public opinion.
Yes.
Because I sometimes think that it's more important politics in making Europe work. And all the examples we are giving here, it's not only us to speak a more sort of human-friendly language, but also just really making people understand more, because they are better educated on what is important for their life, which is also Europe.
Right. Andrew, any final words on this?
No, a huge thank you to all the panelists. Fascinating discussion. Do go and have a look at the website. There's a lot of insights, more data. If you have any questions on the methodology, I know that's come up. We're more than happy. No methodology is perfect, but we're pretty confident that this one is objective. We've really invested in it. We're talking about millions of data points that we're using with a very specific methodology. So do go and have a look at that, and let us know if you've got any comments on that.
And see you at the polling stations.
And we want to... I would like, Andrew, also to ask you to try to explore better all those things in the European Parliament which are important for you as data, which are today still hidden. Because we are doing all the decisions and negotiations. So it's just for you to also push us in this direction.
I was thinking, I think Tiemo mentioned the influence of Manfred Weber on environmental policy. And unfortunately, obviously, the data we capture is publicly available data. It sounds like those were probably discussions that weren't captured by data. So unfortunately, no methodology can be perfect, but we certainly, I mean, to your question, we do certainly look at this, and we actually spend a huge amount of time discussing the methodology, refining it, to make sure it was as accurate as possible.
As long as this is not possible, AI will not take over.
Thank you very much. Refreshments are available.